People were dying for lack of resources. We were like, oh my goodness, is this the end of the earth? Is this the end of life?
The failure by the authorities to deal with the rescue and evacuation of so many compounds the disaster.
The big thing that caught people off guard was the floodwaters. Nobody expected 80% of the city to be underwater.
Almost a decade later, 1 in 5 of the population still hasn't returned. And large sections of the city lie in ruins.
I'm currently driving through the lower 9th Ward here, one of the areas that was hardest hit from Hurricane Katrina. And most of the houses here, people didn't come back to. They just abandoned them or just left them here to rot. And it's sort of sad because a neighborhood is gone. It's going to take a generation or more to rebuild this area.
2 weeks after Katrina swamped New Orleans, President George Bush apologizes for the administration's failure to deal with the aftermath.
Katrina exposed serious problems in our response capability at all levels of government. And to the extent that the federal government didn't fully do its job right, I take responsibility.
This is how the Earth looked at the end of the last ice age. The northern hemisphere covered in ice. Europe barely recognizable. But evidence suggests the world map is about to be redrawn by a mega flood of biblical proportions. Oceanographer Simon Boxall is fascinated by the idea of a planet-changing flood and has nominated it for the top 10. This disaster begins around 10,000 years ago, at the end of the last ice age. A huge glacier covering an area we now know as Canada is receding. As it melts, a vast freshwater lake bigger than Texas forms. For a time, the water is contained behind a wall of ice. But 8,500 years ago, this ice gives way, releasing this colossal body of water into the world's oceans.
This had a dramatic impact on the already rising sea levels, adding a further 1 to 2 meters, 3 to 6 feet in a very short period of time. And if that was to happen today with the same speed, it would completely devastate London, New York. In fact, it would impact on every coastal nation around the world.
And in the ancient world, the rising waters spreading across the planet could have also led to disaster. Because according to some studies, the area now covered by the Black Sea was once home to one of the largest populations of the time. Simon Boxall meets Konstantin Cherev, who in 2011 took part in a survey of the Black Sea that produced an astonishing find.
When we scanned the seabed, we found a formation that's really unusual. It was sort of a round hill, and that's not very common for the Black Sea. So we decided to send a probe and take a sample of it.
As they carefully inspected the core sample, the scientists made an unexpected discovery. Tiny pieces of wood.
This is the top. When we analyzed the wood and carbon dated it, we found that it's 9,000 years old, and that's amazing.
Where did it come from?
The most exciting scenario is that this underwater hill is actually an ancient human settlement, because as a shape and size and height, it exactly matches the settlements on the ground we found all over Eastern Europe.
Cherev is certain an area that's now under 90 meters of water was once dry land.
Absolutely. I'm 100% positive about it.
To find out more about the people that were living in the region hit by the flood, Simon Boxhall has been given rare access to examine an incredible archaeological find. Unearthed from a nearby burial site dating back over 6,000 years were over 200 skeletons, along with a spectacular treasure trove of gold. Expert Hristo Smolenov believes this precisely made jewelry is proof of a surprisingly advanced civilization.
For instance, those are two separate gold objects, quite different, and still they fit perfectly. And this is more than you can expect from a culture 7,000 years old. It is a superculture. I think the migration of this superculture that followed some of the catastrophic events that took place here is responsible for the migration of knowledge as well.
If Smolenov is correct, it is possible that the scattering of this ancient population may have sowed the seeds from which the Egyptian and Greek cultures eventually grew 2,000 years later. Simon Boxhall is also convinced of the profound effect this mega flood had on humanity. Performs at the San Francisco Opera House. But in just a few hours, this proud city will be turned into a disaster zone.
At 5 in the morning, things were pretty quiet. But suddenly at 5:12, the earthquake hit.
An earthquake with a magnitude of 7.8 shakes the city. Roads rip apart and people panic.
People realized it was an earthquake, but very few understood where the earthquake might be coming from and what might happen next.
Buildings never designed to withstand earthquakes crumble.
The City Hall was the biggest building west of the Mississippi River. It took humans 25 years to build it. It took the earthquake 2 minutes to destroy it.
It's not just the collapse of their homes the residents have to deal with. The tremors crack gas pipes. All it takes is one flame to ignite the fumes. In just a few hours, an inferno engulfs San Francisco.
There were probably 50 fires that began in this part of San Francisco, and they eventually coalesced into a massive firestorm that consumed, on the first day, all of the central business district down along Market Street. Those flames then spread on the second and third day to the west and north up to Fisherman's Wharf. During those 3 days, the city was almost completely destroyed by fire.
After 3 days, the fires burn themselves out, to leave a scene of utter annihilation. 80% of the city is in ruins. But it's what happens next that makes the 1906 earthquake one of the top 10 disasters.
3 days after the 1906 earthquake, before the fires of San Francisco had stopped burning, George Pardee, the governor of California, appointed a special commission to study the earthquake and learn from what had happened.
It falls to Professor Andrew Lawson and his team from Berkeley University to conduct the first comprehensive survey of an earthquake.
The Lawson Report in 2 volumes represents a most incredible breakthrough in our understanding of how earthquakes work.
At the time, people thought the fault line that runs near San Francisco was caused by the quake. But Lawson's report confirmed it was the other way around. And he named the culprit behind the 1906 disaster, the San Andreas Fault. It's a revelation that's helped geologists like Alan Lester to better understand the mechanics of earthquakes.
The disastrous 1906 earthquake turned out to be a huge learning point for geologists regarding how big faults like the San Andreas move. Strike-slip faults like the San Andreas have the capacity to build up huge amounts of strain and stress within the earth. It's very much like taking a stick and pushing on it, building and building the deformation in the stick, and if that force, if that stress is released, it comes right back. It's elastic. But there is a point where if you push a little too hard, it breaks. That's exactly what happened in 1906, and with most of the major earthquakes that have occurred along the San Andreas, a point has been reached where the earth can no longer take the strain that's been building, and it breaks.
From my personal point of view, the 1906 earthquake is the most important earthquake because we learned for the first time important facts about how earthquakes occur, and with that knowledge, we hope to be able to avoid the kinds of destruction that San Francisco saw in that terrible day.
The 7th of June, 1783. For weeks, rumbling from deep inside the earth has disturbed the peace of the Icelandic countryside. Within 24 hours, it will be ripped apart and transformed into a fiery hell on Earth. It's the start of a toxic cataclysm that will engulf the Northern Hemisphere, claiming countless victims from Europe to Asia. Although this disaster is relatively unknown, volcanologist Thor Thordarson rates it as the deadliest volcanic eruption ever, earning it its place in the top 10. In 1783, the plates are particularly restless. As they lurch violently apart, a 30-kilometer crack in the Earth's surface, known as the Larky Fissure, rips open. Along its length, 130 bubbling craters spew out billions of tons of molten rock, and will continue to do so for 8 fiery months.
It is the largest eruption on Earth in the last 500 years. That makes Larky one of the greatest eruptions in history.
As Larky erupts, over 40 billion tons of lava spill out of the fissure, enough to engulf a city the size of Chicago. Normally, when lava is exposed to air, it cools and solidifies, which limits how far it can travel. But the lava from Larky was able to travel for hundreds of kilometers, thanks to an underground system. Led by local guide Bjorn Hjorsen, Thor explores the remnants of this subterranean network, known as lava tubes. The caves are created when the upper layers of lava form a crust, protecting the free-flowing molten rock below from the cold air.
Look at that level of the lava river right there. And out here, part of the roof is remelting. Then you can even see these nice little droplets coming down. This shows how hot this environment was at the time, how hot the lava is, how hot the gas is right above the lavas, because to form this, the temperature needs to be at 1100 degrees C. These are the key to making long lava flows. When you transport the lava through these kind of systems, it just stays fluid and hot all the way down until it breaks out of the transport system.
Traveling through the tubes, Larky's lava spreads over 60 kilometers before eventually resurfacing. In total, the molten rock razes 20 villages to the ground. Laki also hurls out millions of tons of ash and toxic gases, poisoning the soil and crops. 3/4 of Iceland's sheep and more than half of all its livestock die. The people soon follow.
Because of starvation and other diseases, about 21% of the Icelandic population perished as a consequence of the Laki eruption.
But the Laki eruption is to have an even more disastrous effect on the rest of the world. Although remote, Icelandic volcanoes can have far-reaching consequences, as recent events prove. The cloud from Laki engulfs a vast part of the northern hemisphere and carries with it something far more deadly than just ash.
Total of 120 million tons of sulfur dioxide were emitted into the atmosphere, where it reacted with atmospheric vapor to produce sulfuric aerosols.
These aerosols block the sun's heat, causing global temperatures to plummet. In Europe, the cold causes intolerable food shortages. Some experts believe these drove hungry peasants in France to rise up, eventually leading to the French Revolution of 1789. Across the Atlantic, temperatures also drop dramatically.
On the eastward of North America, the winter 1783-84 is the longest and the most severe on record. It was so cold that people saw ice flows on the river Mississippi.
Laki's malign influence on the climate throws monsoon cycles into disarray, leading to widespread crop failure. Up to 1/6 of Egypt's population, and many more across India and North Africa, die from starvation.
So in total, Laki may have caused death of almost 2 million people in 1783.
Despite its remote location, Laki had a profound effect on the entire planet. It disrupted global climate and caused deadly famines as far away as Africa and Asia.
Its impact on nature, the atmosphere and the weather, people and history, in my view, makes this one of the most important natural disasters of all times.
December 2004. Tourists relax on the beaches around the Indian Ocean. In just 3 hours, the lives of hundreds of thousands of people will be wiped out.
Get inside, get inside!
By the deadliest tsunami ever seen. It's this disaster that tsunami expert Jose Barrero has selected for the top 10.
I'm here in Banda Aceh, Sumatra, the northern tip of Sumatra Island facing into the Indian Ocean. This place in particular suffered one of the worst tsunami disasters in human history.
The Indian Ocean, bordered by Asia, Africa, and Australia. In December 2004, millions are enjoying the holiday season along its shores, including Steve Gill, his wife Heather, and stepdaughter Charlotte, who are on vacation in Thailand.
We had arranged to go out for a traditional Christmas meal. Everything was new and warm and fairly unspoiled, undeveloped, very, very quiet. Idyllic, I guess you'd say, yeah.
In the Indonesian town of Banda Aceh, local resident Eddie Quenslow is visiting friends and family.
I went to the town, sleep in my friend's house. There is close between my sister's house and my friend's house.
The earthquake has a magnitude of 9.1, the third largest ever recorded. As the Eurasian plate thrusts upwards by 20 meters, it displaces billions of tons of water.
The resulting wave traveled east towards Thailand and Indonesia and west towards India and Sri Lanka. And in the tsunami's path were millions of people.
Peaking at 800 kilometers an hour, the tsunami will take 30 minutes to hit the Sumatran coast. Around an hour later, it will reach Thailand. Although they felt the earthquake, with no tsunami warning systems in place, people around the Indian Ocean coastline are oblivious to the approaching threat.
I saw the building is destroyed, and we are scared, of course, but we didn't know it's tsunami, it's happened.
For the holidaymakers in Thailand, the first hint of the impending disaster is the strange sight of the ocean disappearing.
The bay was empty. All I could see was rocks, all the way over to the yacht club, all the way over to the other island. There's nothing there.
One of the more enduring and dramatic images of the 2004 tsunami was the withdrawal of the water level from the shoreline, leaving the entire foreshore area exposed. This is a phenomenon known as drawdown, and it's caused by the tectonic displacements offshore. While one section of the plate is thrust upwards, the section of the plate closer to the coastline actually subsides, and the water rushing in to fill that void is what causes the withdrawal of the shoreline. Had more people realized that this was the sign of an impending tsunami, perhaps more lives would have been saved.
This is the time people should have started running, but instead, the curious sight lures people onto the beach.
It was bizarre, but it was fascinating. I think I did actually briefly go to the front of the house again and look and think about, walking out, and I thought, no, that's just not right. It's wrong. Exactly how it's wrong, I don't know, but it's wrong.
By the time many react, it's too late.
Myself, my wife, and my stepdaughter discussed our next move, and we just didn't get to make it, basically.
At 8:15 a.m., the tsunami hits northern Sumatra. The city of Banda Aceh, home to over 250,000 people, is about to suffer its full force.
I'm here in the busy city center of Banda Aceh, and it was here on this street corner where some of the most graphic video footage of the tsunami was recorded. On the street behind me, the tsunami surge came flowing up the road, channeled between the buildings. Watching the footage, we see that the leading edge of the tsunami was actually slow enough that people could escape simply by running or walking. However, this part of Banda Aceh is very far from the ocean, and people simply didn't know what to do. As the flood depth increases, so too does the speed of the flow, until there's no way to escape unless you can get to high ground. That's what the person who shot this video did. He climbed up over here. And he lived. However, thousands of other people that day could not get to high ground, and they ended up dying in the waves.
Crammed with billions of tons of debris, the wave is an unstoppable battering ram. Eddie Quenslow is one of the many that scrambled to safety near the Grand Mosque.
Materials come like the iron, the stone, the rocks, the bed, shirt, motorcycle, a car. You can see people mixed with the water, everything material.
The tsunami wave came right through here. These are very sturdy concrete buildings, and many of them weren't knocked over by the tsunami, but rather the water flowed through them, between them, and actually channelized the flow and made it speed up and get deeper in some areas. The water here didn't go past the first story. It was all pretty much less than about 8 or 10 feet deep. So in terms of escaping, A lot of people could have gotten away just by getting up to the second story, as the cameraman did at the corner.
I was thinking I will die, and I saw many people need help, but I could not help because too many people need help. I saw many babies. Of course they need help. Sometimes I just put on the top because I don't know where I have to bring them, how I can bring them to where, because all is a flood. That means everywhere is water.
30 minutes after the tsunami hits Banda Aceh, it smashes into the Thai island of Phuket.
Get inside!
Steve Gill's beach bungalow is directly in its path.
I think our conversation ended when we heard the roar of the water. We still couldn't see the wave until we turned to look at the small alleyway between the two buildings. It was traveling at a speed estimated between 200 and 300 miles an hour. I remember being struck by the water. Realistically, there wasn't any expectation of ever coming out the other side. It was just, is this the way it ends? Because the sheer power of what has hit you doesn't allow any space for an escape plan. There are no plans for the future. I was found in the stagnant wreckage, if you like, about a quarter mile up the road.
Although he soon reunites with his stepdaughter, Steve is never to see his wife alive again. Over the next 20 minutes, 3 massive waves, up to 10 meters high, crash into the small resort. 1,000 tons of water smashing down on each meter of coastline. Beach after beach, wave after wave, the tsunami brings death and destruction. In Thailand, over 5,000 people perish, with another 3,000 missing. In Indonesia, the tsunami obliterates Banda Aceh.
I could not imagine why like this I lose my best friend. I was thinking like, why God didn't take me? Better He take me than my best friend. And also, but my auntie also, we didn't find his bodies. My cousin, many my cousin passed away. We cannot find bodies.
In total, the waves strike 14 countries around the Indian Ocean, taking lives as far away as Africa. The final death toll will make the 2004 tsunami the most lethal ever seen. A decade on, and the streets of Banda Aceh are as busy as ever. And lessons have been learnt. Buildings like this one have been constructed throughout the area to provide safe refuge should another killer wave strike. For Jose Barrero, they're a powerful reminder of why he regards this disaster as one of the worst ever.
The combination of the exceptionally large earthquake and the tsunami, which caused such a devastating human toll over so many countries, makes the 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami one of the top 10 natural disasters in human history.
I could not eat, I could not drink, I could move my eyeballs, and I could blink.
Historian Susanna Lipscomb has chosen the apocalyptic calamity of the Black Death as our final top 10 natural disaster.
1348. One of the most extraordinary, and for historians like me, one of the most fascinating episodes of world history is starting to unfold. Word is spreading across medieval Europe that people are dying of a strange pestilence. Having reached the banks of England, it's headed for London, and there's nothing that London's teeming population can do to stop it.
Strange black lumps appear on the victims' necks and groins, called buboes. The reason it's called the bubonic plague. Within 10 days of developing the symptoms, over half of those infected die an agonizing death. But the bubonic plague is not a disease consigned to history. As John Tull discovers when he develops strange symptoms while on vacation in New York.
We took a cab to the travel doctor's office. I was so sick by that point that I could not sit in a chair in his waiting room, and I laid down on the floor. And he took one look and said, "You have the bubonic plague."
With his condition rapidly deteriorating, John and his wife Lucinda are rushed into hospital.
By this time, I was totally out of it, and they suggested that they put me in a medically induced coma. Lucinda and I talked about it a little bit. We thought it might be 1 or 2, 3 days. Well, it turned out to be 90 days.
Within 2 days of his going into this coma, his extremities started turning black, his hands and his feet.
Today, in the West, the chances of catching the so-called Black Death are slim. But in the 14th century, conditions are primed for the plague to spread like wildfire.
The world population had dramatically expanded over the previous centuries. London had gone from a population of 15,000 in the 12th century to 80,000 in the 1300s, all hemmed in between the river and the old Roman walls. London was more densely populated than it had ever been. Perfect conditions for an epidemic to flourish.
The squalor is extraordinary. With no sewage system, human and animal waste runs down the streets like a river. Yet despite the filth, medieval London's a thriving centre of international commerce, as it is today.
This might look quintessentially modern, but trading has been going on in London since medieval times. The city was packed with people. It was a commercial hub. Driven by the demands for silks and spices, international trade flourished. London was overrun with exotic imports and people from around the world. And as well as goods and people, London was being filled with something it didn't want that had been brought to England's shores.
The international trade opens the door to a new foreign visitor. Asian black rats, who thrive in London's dirty streets. And on the back of these rats are fleas we now know carry the plague bacteria, Yersinia pestis, in their stomachs. But in the 14th century, with no understanding of how the Black Death is spread, the people are defenseless to its invisible threat.
And so when the disease did arrive, it ripped through this densely packed population and did immense damage.
Although uncommon, rats carrying plague-infected fleas are still found in some parts of the US.
We live on 5 acres, and it's in the country. And we have thousands, probably, of rodents just on our 5 acres. And maybe a third of them have the plague.
All it takes is one bite from an infected flea. And John's immune system can do little to stop the plague bacteria from spreading. While John is still in his coma, Lucinda is forced to make a life or death decision.
Lucinda woke me up on January 14th or 15th And she said, honey, I love you. It's January 15th, and your legs have been amputated.
If I had not given permission for that, I don't think John would have lived. And I was determined that I would do everything within my power to see that he would live. So painful, difficult, horrible as it was, I made that decision and gave them permission to do amputations.
Although science has done much to combat the plague, as John Tull shows, it can still strike with horrendous effect. In 14th century Europe, all they can do is bury their dead. Excavated plague pits in London give a terrifying indication of just how fast the disease kills when it enters a city's walls.
So Yelena, this is actually a skeleton of a 14th century plague victim.
It is, yes. This is a female, and she was found from East Smithfield Catastrophe Cemetery.
I'm guessing that she was one of many.
Yes, from that site we curate over 600, but they believe that there were several thousand that would have actually been buried there. So yes, high numbers of people dying very quickly.
In England, over a quarter of the entire population succumbs to the Black Death.
When this huge number of people died, how did they cope with all the corpses?
You might think with a catastrophe that you're just going to get these great big open pits and everyone's just going to be flung in rather randomly. But the interesting thing about East Smithfield is that people are actually being placed in a very nice, neat, ordered manner. They're trying to sort of follow the process of a Christian burial, so they're sort of trying to keep some sort of degree of normality around, you know, this sort of awful epicenter of this catastrophe.
By the time the Black Death finally retreats, it's killed 1 in 3 of Europe's population, equivalent to over 240 million today. The death toll, the cost, and the legacy of this disaster have no equal.
The Black Death was the most profound disaster that humankind has ever known. Its symptoms were horrifying and degrading. It brought fear and humiliation. It was sudden and lethal. It was the ultimate pandemic and the worst natural disaster that humankind has ever experienced. It's little wonder that we remember it with horror 700 years later.
The top 10 natural disasters share little in common. They are meteorological, biological, geological. They've struck every continent and caused unimaginable horror. Nowhere and no one is safe. And yet, we are still here. We are the survivors, members of a uniquely adaptable species. Now we need to heed the warnings of history and prepare for future disasters. Because they will strike again.